Enter into a realm of fright, blacker than the darkest night. Your sanity hangs by a thread. Welcome to the House of Dread. Teeth. Has someone ever been attracted to you, but you weren't attracted to them? Was there something about their physical appearance, a personality quirk that rubbed you the wrong way? Or maybe you just weren't feeling their vibe? If so, how did you handle such a situation? Did you politely reject them? Or were you a little more abrasive? Enter Laura. Laura is a vibrant and ambitious young woman with a promising life ahead of her. She's an administrative assistant for a big tech firm, and she's focused on climbing the corporate ladder and stepping into a leadership role at the company. As a single, career-driven woman with no children, she has the freedom to pursue her dreams with minimal distractions. She's educated and has several degrees, including a master's in business administration. Not only is she highly intelligent, but she's also very attractive and has a large pool of men who have their eyes on her. One of those men in particular is her co-worker, Leroy. Leroy is a man of average height and build with a very warm and friendly demeanor. He's the kind of person who always goes out of his way to help others, even if it means sacrificing his own time and resources. Unfortunately, however, Leroy has a problem. His smile. His teeth look like something out of a horror movie. Yes, Leroy's teeth were a sight to behold, and not in a good way. They were crooked and misaligned, with some of them missing entirely. The ones that remained were coated in a thick layer of plaque and tartar, giving them a yellowish-brown hue that was enough to make anyone cringe. But it wasn't just the appearance of his teeth that was off-putting. Leroy suffered from a severe case of halitosis that could clear a room in seconds. The stench was overpowering, like a mixture of rotten eggs and decaying flesh. Naturally, people avoided getting too close to him or engaging in conversation for too long. Leroy found himself to be highly attracted to Laura, and oh boy was he ever persistent. Leroy was a shy man and knew that his teeth were a major turnoff for most people, but he couldn't help the way he felt about Laura. She was smart, beautiful, and driven. Everything he wanted in a partner. So he tried to get her attention in safe and harmless ways. He would bring her coffee in the morning, always making sure to get the amount of cream and sugar just right. He would leave little notes on her desk, complimenting her on her work or wishing her a good day. Despite his best efforts, Laura never seemed to reciprocate his feelings. She was always polite, but distant, never giving him any indication that she was interested in him romantically. Leroy's heart ached with longing every time he saw Laura talking to other men in the office. He couldn't help but feel jealous and insecure, knowing that he could never compete with their pearly white teeth and minty fresh breath. In truth, Laura was repulsed by Leroy's terrible teeth and foul breath. Again, she tried her best to be polite and professional around him. However, as time went on, and particularly as Leroy's flirting became more frequent, she found it increasingly difficult to hide her disgust. At a certain point, Leroy began to realize that the most honest and direct approach he could take would be to just ask Laura out. And this is exactly what he decided to do. One day, while everyone was at lunch, Leroy decided to make his move. Laura had a routine of eating her lunch in the office cafeteria. She usually ordered a sub sandwich with a side of soup, and then she would make her way over to a table where she enjoyed chatting and eating her lunch with her girlfriends. At first, Leroy was very hesitant to approach Laura at this time, since she was eating and she was also in the company of other women. Leroy knew that he was running the risk of not only embarrassing himself in front of Laura, but her friends and everyone else in the cafeteria. Unfortunately, however, Leroy couldn't think of any other time to approach Laura. She was always extremely busy, and he rarely ever caught her alone by herself. He didn't have any of her personal contact information, such as a phone number or an email address, so he couldn't try to reach out to her after work. He simply didn't know what else to do. Leroy was tired of making passive attempts at trying to get Laura's attention with no reciprocation. He figured it was time to turn up the heat, and that if he was going to make his move, it had to be now. Right now. Leroy's heart was pounding in his chest as he made his way over to Laura's table in the cafeteria. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, and he knew that this was a make-or-break moment. He had to do this now, or he would never have another chance. As he approached Laura's table, he could see her sitting there with her friends, laughing and chatting away. She looked so beautiful, so confident, and so out of his league, but he had to try. Leroy boldly walked up to Laura's table, and immediately, the bright and cheerful chatter of Laura and her friends came to an abrupt end. Leroy's mouth was as dry as the Sahara Desert, but he managed to successfully formulate his request and asked Laura if he could take her out sometime. There was a moment of silence as Laura looked at him, her expression unreadable. Leroy could feel his heart sinking in his chest. Sadly, with a gentle but firm tone, Laura said she didn't think it would be a good idea for them to go out. Leroy felt like he had been punched in the gut. He knew that rejection was a possibility, but it still hurt like all hell. Leroy said he understood and appreciated Laura's consideration. As Leroy turned to walk away, he could feel the eyes of everyone in the cafeteria on him once again. He felt like a fool, and he could hear Laura's girlfriends snickering at him behind his back. Then, as Laura watched Leroy walk away, she suddenly felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She looked down at her food and realized that she couldn't eat another bite. It wasn't just the rejection that was making her feel sick. It was Leroy's teeth. They were even worse up close than she had ever imagined. The yellowish-brown hue was even more pronounced, and the smell coming from his mouth was almost unbearable. Laura struggled to keep her composure as she excused herself from the table and made her way to the bathroom. She knew that she had to get out of there before she lost her lunch. As she washed her hands in the sink, Laura couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that she had turned Leroy down. She had never found Leroy remotely attractive and was getting tired of his passive flirting and relentless efforts to grab her attention. She was certain that since she had publicly rejected him, it was finally over. A few weeks later, it was time for the company's annual Christmas party. Laura and her co-workers turned out in full force as they enjoyed good food, drinks, and party games. Laura was having a great time with her friends. They were all dressed up in their finest attire, sipping on cocktails and laughing at each other's jokes. Suddenly, Leroy appeared out of nowhere, looking nervous but determined. He approached Laura's group and asked if he could speak to her for a moment. Laura's friends immediately started giggling and whispering to each other, eyeing Leroy's teeth with disgust. Leroy tried to ignore their snickering and explained that he just wanted to check on Laura to make sure that she was doing okay. But the more he spoke, the louder the girls laughed. Laura, who was feeling a bit tipsy from all the drinks, joined in on the teasing. She made fun of Leroy's teeth and told him that he should see a dentist before trying to talk to women again. As if that wasn't bad enough, one of Laura's girlfriends told Leroy his mouth looked like something out of The Walking Dead. Laura decided to co-sign the derogatory remark and called Leroy Zombie Mouth. This caused everyone at the party to erupt into laughter. Leroy's heart sank as he realized that Laura had turned into one of those mean girls that he had always avoided in high school. He couldn't believe that she would be so cruel after he had only wanted to make sure that she was doing okay. Feeling embarrassed and humiliated, Leroy quickly excused himself from the party and left without saying goodbye to anyone. He felt like a fool for ever thinking that Laura could be different from the rest of her friends. As he drove home that cold winter night, Leroy couldn't help but feel like his heart had been shattered into a million pieces. He knew that he would never be able to look at Laura or her friends the same way again. After the party, once Laura had a chance to sober up, she was cringing at the thought of her childish behavior and the cruel way she and her girlfriends had treated Leroy. Under the influence of alcohol and social pressure, she allowed her better judgment to become clouded. She felt terrible and was wondering if Leroy was okay. She resolved that the first thing she would do when she saw him again was apologize. However, when she returned to work, she was disheartened to find out that Leroy had quit. She knew it had to be because of the cruelty and heartlessness that she and her girlfriends had displayed at the party. After all, what other reason would Leroy have had to just up and quit? Laura felt awful, but she couldn't undo what had been done. Leroy was gone. All she could do was hope that her insensitive behavior wouldn't cause Leroy to harm himself. Several months went by and both Leroy and the Christmas party were distant memories. Laura was back to being fully focused on climbing the corporate ladder. In fact, she was due for a promotion and a big raise, and she was doing everything in her power to make herself the ideal candidate for both. One evening, as Laura was making her way to her car in preparation to go home, she noticed a man wearing a hoodie standing just a few rows from where her car was parked. Creepy and unsettling to say the least, Laura began to pick up her pace. Her leisurely walk turned into a light jog as she rushed to climb into her vehicle. She immediately locked the doors, started the engine, and put the car in reverse as she prepared to back out of her parking space. Just as she was about to hit the gas, Laura let out a terrifying scream as she looked in her rearview mirror. The hooded man was now standing directly behind her car. Laura's heart froze with fear. Laura began screaming at the hooded man, threatening to run him over if he didn't move out of her way. Then the dark figure began to slowly remove his hood. Laura could not believe her eyes. It was Leroy. She was totally speechless. Leroy slammed both of his hands down on the trunk of Laura's car, looked deep into her eyes, and began uttering a strange incantation. With a voice so low and sinister, Leroy began to chant.
By the power of darkness and the spirits that haunt and enchant, I curse you, Laura, for your cruel words and taunts. Your teeth will rot and decay. Your smile will be gaunt. Your breath will smell like rotting death, a foul odor with every breath. And though you may seek a cure with all your might, your teeth will remain a gruesome sight. You'll feel the pain of every tooth as they turn black and decay. And when you look in the mirror, you'll see my smile on display. Dear Laura, oh so fine, but in the morning your smile will look just like mine.
Laura sat in her car totally spellbound, unable to move or speak. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Leroy was gone. After shaking off the feelings of dizziness and confusion that had overwhelmed her as Leroy was casting his spell, Laura was finally able to put her car into gear and drive home. After arriving home safe and sound, Laura thought about calling the police to report the incident, but she was so relieved that Leroy didn't physically harm her, she decided to just go to bed and forget about the whole damn thing. However, as she slipped under the covers, Laura thought about the words that Leroy spoke. Although she was not a believer in spells or magic, the level of conviction Leroy had as he spoke those words caused Laura to shiver. It took her a while to calm down, but eventually she settled into a deep, peaceful sleep. The next morning, Laura was horrified to find drool and spots of blood on her pillow where her mouth had been resting. She also noticed a foul odor pervading her entire bedroom and realized it was coming from her mouth. It was her own breath. God, no, it couldn't be. In a panic, she raced to the bathroom, turned on the light, and almost had a stroke when she looked in the mirror. Just yesterday, Laura had a smile that could have won her the title of Miss America. Now she looked like something out of The Walking Dead. Her teeth were now brown, yellow, and black. They were also crooked and gapped. Her gums were inflamed, bleeding and sore to the touch, and her breath was foul and nauseating. As Laura stared at her reflection in the mirror, she could feel the terror rising within her. She realized that the curse was real, and that now she was experiencing what Leroy had felt when she had made fun of him. The pain was so excruciating that she couldn't even scream. All she could do was give off muffled moans of agony, grief, and regret. Laura's heart raced as she thought about how this would affect her career. She had worked so hard to climb the professional ranks at her job, but now she feared that her appearance would hold her back. She couldn't bear the thought of being seen like this by her colleagues, or worse yet, by her boss. Laura immediately called into work to report herself sick, but she knew she wouldn't be able to do that forever. Sooner rather than later, she'd be forced to step out into the public. Later that day, she called one of her girlfriends in an attempt to get some emotional and moral support. When her friend answered the phone, Laura immediately noticed that her friend didn't sound quite right. In fact, she sounded like she was in distress. Her speech was slurred, and she was crying hysterically. Her friend told her that the night before, a strange man appeared as she was getting in her car to go home. She said the man was wearing a hoodie and that he was chanting some strange words about rotten teeth and foul breath. Strangest of all, Laura's friend said the man kind of resembled Leroy, but that his hoodie prevented her from being able to completely make out his face. Laura's friend told her that the next morning when she awoke, her teeth were rotten and that she was in excruciating pain. Laura almost dropped the phone. She shouted at her friend that it was Leroy and that he had done the same thing to her. Laura immediately called her other girlfriends, and it was confirmed. Leroy had done the same horrible thing to all of them. It was his revenge for being mocked and made to feel like a fool. Laura's life had been turned upside down by Leroy's curse. She had gone from a confident and successful woman to a shell of her former self. She was now the one being mocked and ridiculed, and the worst part was that there was no way out. Leroy was never seen or heard from again, and burdened by the shame of her frightening appearance, Laura spent the rest of her life as a recluse. She always wondered how different her life would have been if she had just kept her cruel words to herself. Be very careful who you mock, lest the tables be turned against you. If you enjoyed this presentation, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And if you're in need of a narrator for your next project, or you just want to say hello, contact me at thehouseofdread666@gmail.com. Until the next tale of terror, this is Victor Bloodborne. Stay dreadful.